Chapter 9 is all about quadratic equations. And by the end of this lesson, you should be able to identify what one of those is and then solve it by taking the square root. So let's talk about what a quadratic equation is. Quadratic equation is an equation that can be written in the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. This form is called the standard form of quadratic equation. So remember we had standard form of a linear equation? We just called it standard form because we only knew linear stuff. But that was ax plus by equals c. This is very, very close. The thing that makes something quadratic, though, is the fact that you have an x squared on there. So a quadratic equation can have 2, 1, or no real number solutions. In a future course, you'll learn about solutions that are not real, and those are called imaginary solutions, but that's Algebra 2 nonsense. The solutions to a quadratic equation and related x-intercepts are often called the roots or zeros of the function. So we've already talked about this earlier in the class, but remember when you hear the word x-intercept, several other things should come to mind. Solutions, zeros, and roots. Those are all the same thing. So it doesn't matter what type of directions I give you. If I ask you for one of those things, you should be able to figure it out. So let's talk about the fact that sometimes a quadratic equation can have 2 solutions, 1 solution, or no solution. Because in the past stuff that we've done with linear, our options were only to have 1 solution. You'd get something like x equals 3. Or you could have like 0 equals 0. That would be infinitely many solutions. Or you'd get something like 0 equals 3, which means no solutions. So this is very similar, except let's put a picture with it to help it make a little more sense. So let's say I gave you something like this to solve, and we'll talk about how to solve this in a second. If I graph this, I end up with 2 x-intercepts. And remember, x-intercepts are solutions. They're those numbers right there. If I graph this, I end up with 1 solution, or 1 x-intercept. And same thing with this one. It's not going to cross anywhere. There's no x-intercepts. That means that there are no solutions. So we're going to learn 4 ways to solve quadratic equations. Methods to solve. The first one we're going to learn today, and it's solving by square rooting. The second one we'll talk about next is factoring. Then we have to talk about one called completing the square. And then finally, the fourth one, we'll use the quadratic formula. So the ones we're going to do today, we're going to solve by taking the square root. And in order to do that, we can start with these ones, but let's go back to these guys here. In order to do that, the first thing you have to do is get x squared alone. And then remember, squares and square roots undo each other. So once x squared is alone, you're going to take the square root. So this one, x squared is not alone, but to get it there, I'm going to add 4 to both sides. So I get x squared equals 4. And then to undo this squaring thing, I'm going to take the square root of both sides. So I get x equals, this part's a little tricky here. Whenever you take the square root of a number, you have to use plus or minus the option, because think about when we plug something back in. 2 squared would give me 4, but so would negative 2 squared, because a negative times a negative is a positive. So you need to throw a plus or minus on the outside of all of these. And then we can see that positive 2 and negative 2 are right where this crosses. So the next one, x squared is alone, so all I need to do is take the square root of both sides. Now remember plus or minus, but if I have positive 0 or negative 0, it's still just 0. So with this, we can see there's only 1 solution, and it crosses right here. Now with this one, got to get x squared by itself. And then I got to take the square root. And when I try to take the square root of this, I cannot take the square root of a negative number, so this has no solutions. And we can see that if I was to graph this, it's not going to cross the x-axis. So let's try some more. Let's try A. So remember, you always, always, always need to get the thing squared alone. So let's add 25 to both sides. And I have t squared equals 25. And when I go to square root it, I end up with plus or minus 5. Let's try the next one. I have to get n squared alone. So the first thing I'm going to undo is this 12. Subtract it from both sides. And I get that it equals 0, which is okay. But this isn't alone yet, so I have to divide by 3. So I get the n squared equals 0. Now when I take the square root, it does not matter that I have plus or minus 0. I'm just going to have one answer there. N equals 0. Last one. Get the g squared by itself, so I'll subtract 32. Divide everything by 2 to get g squared alone. And then I'm going to go and take the square root of negative 16. And you should have a red flag because you know you can't take square roots of negatives. So right here I would have no solution. Alright, let's not do this problem. Cross this guy off and we're going to create a couple different ones. Let's say I have x plus 2 all squared. And it equals 16. So remember, with all the other problems we've done, the first thing you have to do is get whatever squared by itself. And in this case, whatever squared is by itself, so I can take the square root of both sides. Now remember, squares and square roots cross each other off, so I get x plus 2 equals, remember you have to have plus or minus 4. Whenever you get something like this, this is basically two problems in one. This is saying x plus 2 could equal positive 4, or x plus 2 could equal negative 4. And then we have to solve both of these. So let's subtract 2 from both sides here. So one of my answers is 2. And then subtract 2 from both sides here, and I get negative 6. So these are my two possible answers for this one. Let's try one more like this. Let's say I have 3 times x minus 4 all squared equals 27. So remember, you need to get whatever is squared by itself. So right now it's this stuff in parentheses. So to get it by itself, I got to divide by 3. And I get x minus 4 all squared equals 9. So now I can take the square root of both sides. So square and square root cross each other off, and I get the x minus 4 equals plus or minus 3. Remember, that gives us two different problems. The x minus 4 could equal positive 3, or it could equal negative 3. And then you get x equals 7, or your other option, whoa, I don't know what happened there. Your other option would be x equals 1. So these are the only two types of problems you're going to see. Make sure that you get whatever is squared by itself, take the square root, and then solve accordingly. So I want you to see if you can identify a quadratic equation. Write an example of one and a non-example of one. And then solve these two things and talk about this. Make sure you write down any questions you have, and we can go over them in class. Enjoy your night.